Zachary, when Las Vegas Sands reports, what are investors going to be looking on? Because I know the thing that made my eyes pop out was they're spending $8 billion. Is that the right number on building out this ultra luxury resort in Singapore? But I question where do you get the cash to do that? But what should we pay attention to?
Yeah, I do think, that will be, kind of top of investors' minds. 8 billion, like you said, is a lot for a company. They've got, you know, a fair amount of debt that would almost double their debt. It would be a large increase to debt if they were to, raise debt to do that. But they do, I do think it is the right area to invest. Singapore has been really good for them over the past few years. It's been leading in terms of EBITDA, revenue growth. And so I do think if they are going to invest, that's a great place to do it.
And the $8 billion is not a red flag for investors because as a Luddite, and not the right term, but I'm trying to figure out how many years does it take to even break even on that kind of investment?
Yeah, it is a big number. I do think it does raise some flags. Obviously, a lot of these companies are pretty indebted. They typically carry a lot of long-term debt on their balance sheet. And like I said, this would almost, not quite double, but this would nearly double, if they were to raise it all off debt. I do think if they spread it out over time, it's not that big of a deal. They're generating a lot of free cash flow right now in Macau and Singapore. And I do think, with kind of some of the near-term data that we've seen out of Macau, that those numbers should be pretty good this year.
You just brought up Asia, and I'm just curious, has Las Vegas lost its luster?
Yeah, I think, you had a couple of year period there where Las Vegas was the cream of the crop, obviously, kind of snapping back from the COVID lows. You had, incredible growth in terms of visitation, revenue, EBITDA, from Las Vegas properties from the top, casino players. And then it shifted in the last 2 years to Macau. Macau was a little bit slower. They hadn't had as much stimulus. They had longer lockdowns and restrictions. And so I think investors really wanted that exposure to Macau. And they flocked to those companies like Las Vegas Sands, Wynn, and MGM. And I think now you've gotten those easy gains from both Las Vegas and Macau. And I think now you're kind of looking at more of stabilization, right? So you're looking at Las Vegas is stable. You're not going to have that incredible growth that you had over the 2021, 2022. And I think now it's kind of what's next for these companies.
I'm going to say the gambling stocks. I know the industry prefers the gaming stocks, but the casino resort stocks, are they reliable, moderate risk, or do they tend to suffer from a great deal of volatility?
They do. They do suffer from volatility. They are very cyclical names, right? So if you have any sort of slowdown in the economy, these are the first that investors typically sell. And it's just because, these are in a slowdown, these typically don't perform well. Consumers pull back on spending and then stop going to these, casinos, and they stop touring and traveling. So I do think there is a lot of volatility in these names, and you want to invest in these names in a stable, kind of economic slow growth environment. I do think this industry definitely, it's volatile. You've seen names run just in recent weeks just because of the kind of some of the data coming out of Macau. Some of these stocks are up 15, 20% in just a couple of days.
Where are we in that volatility cycle for the stocks? Because I'm looking at it from a very myopic North American perspective, tariffs and travelers not coming here. Are we in the volatility period of these, or are we in a stable period? I heard you use the word stabilization for Las Vegas. So where are we?
Yeah, so I do think Las Vegas is stable. I think as long as unemployment remains low, I think Las Vegas will do just fine. They've got a lot of cool, they're bringing a lot of sports to Las Vegas, which has really generated a lot of interest in the area. And I do think that, over the long term will benefit Las Vegas. They're getting new teams. You've seen that in the NFL coming here. MLB's next. And so I do think, over the next few years, they will benefit from those. And like I said, as long as the U.S. consumer remains stable and unemployment remains low, I think those will continue to do okay.
What are you in particular, because you're the expert on this, what are you looking for in the earnings calls and in the report from Las Vegas Sands?
Yeah, so I definitely think they need to back up the Macau, growth that we've seen just in the visitation data from, Macau. government. And I think if they don't do well in Macau, investors will probably get sour pretty quickly. You've seen the data, visitation trends are good. So now they need to back that up and have, strong EBITDA performance and a little bit of revenue growth. I'm not looking for, significant year over year growth. Like I said, we've kind of already gotten that, snapback year or two, when they kind of lifted the restrictions over here and travel started to pick up again. So I'm looking for, low single digit, maybe you can peek into the double digit growth for these, this Macau area region. And then Singapore's been strong. Like I said, kind of hit it at the beginning. Singapore's been so strong for them. They've been, consistently growing in Singapore. And then commentary around, their investment and what they're going to do over how many years.
Would you buy the stock?
Right now, I think, over the last couple of weeks, it's run up pretty quickly. And I do think it's kind of trading at a fair valuation. Las Vegas Sands has, typically traded at a premium to these other names, because of their exposure just to Macau and Singapore. And I do think 10 is kind of a fair multiple in terms of forward EBITDA estimates. So, I think right now it's probably a hold for me. And I'd say, kind of sit on your hands and wait and see, with the new large investment they have and see some of these numbers coming out of Macau.
And should we be concerned? I brought up the tariff situation, and that's very North America centric. But should we be concerned about the loss of Canadian tourists who might have gone to Las Vegas, or could they just as easily get on a flight to Macau?
Yeah, I do think they're probably a very small percentage of tourism to Las Vegas. And I do think, with some of the commentary coming out of the big beautiful bill about it being, maybe a little more expensive to travel to the U.S. I think it was $250 is the number for the, temporary visa. I do think that will have a minor impact. I don't see it being a very large impact for these companies in Las Vegas. And, Las Vegas Sands, is weirdly named after Las Vegas, but has no exposure now after selling, their properties a couple of years ago. But yeah, I think right now, I think Canadians will probably continue to travel, but it's a small percentage. And I do think over the next couple of years, they'll return.